Okay, we'll get going. Thanks everyone for joining. Welcome to today's SSI Toronto webinar, which is entitled Self-Sovereign Identity, a low-cost and low-risk solution for frictionless customer experiences. So my name is Mathieu. I'm the founder and CEO of Northern Block. We're a Toronto-based consultancy focused on solving problems using decentralized identities and blockchains. So we started off in the blockchain space in 2017. We worked on a multitude of enterprise-grade systems that use blockchain, and we've recently made some investments into SSI, realizing that SSI solves many problems in the decentralized solutions we're building today, and also opens up a multitude of benefits for people, organization, and societies. So we founded SSI Toronto this February to help grow the SSI ecosystem. Since we're in Toronto, we started it with in-person events in Toronto, but because of COVID-19, we've turned these events into online webinars like this one, which has been great because it's actually allowed us to have conversations with people across the globe. So for those who don't know, Canada is a real powerhouse in SSI with a lot of strong contributions happening from our governments and private sector. We're always glad to talk about the successes here without taking away from the phenomenal contributions of our global community, which is growing rapidly and adding value to the ecosystem every day. So we've decided to focus today on how SSI can enhance customer experiences, as we believe that, first of all, for a business, having loyal customer base is one of the most important things, and SSI could create stronger relationships between an organization and its customers. And secondly, there's a tremendous first mover advantage to be had by adopting SSI into your organization, which could reap immediate benefits. So we want to have a conversation about how it could be done cheaply and without much risk. So we're glad to be partnering with our friends at Denton's here in Toronto for this webinar. Denton's has the strongest global presence for any law firm with over 11,000 lawyers across the globe. So the team here in Toronto has been quite innovative with their thinking around decentralized business models, and we're very lucky to have them here with us today. And thank you, Denton's, for your continuous support. And as always, thank you to our community partner, DIAC, so the Digital ID and Authentication Council of Canada, which is a non-for-profit with a mission to secure Canada's digital economy participation by delivering a digital identity and authentication interoperability framework, which is quite important. So I know we have some DIAC members here on the call today, so thank you for your continuous support, and hi everyone that's on the call today. So we're going to start with a brief introduction to SSI, to make sure everyone understands the basics. Following that, we'll have about a 35-minute panel discussion with our fantastic guests today. So please submit any questions you may have during the webinar within the chat box. The speakers will try to cover the most relevant questions as we're speaking, and any additional questions, well, we've allocated a bit of time at the end to go over those. So let's start with a brief intro to self-sovereign identity. So for those who are hearing the term self-sovereign identity for the first time, we want to share with you a widely quoted definition of it that comes from Drummond Reed, who actually spoke on our last webinar. And Drummond's contributions have been instrumental in pushing SSI forward. So Drummond describes SSI as lifetime portable identity for any person, organization, or thing that does not depend on any centralized authority and could never be taken away. So we know that SSI could be complicated to grasp, and we believe a lot of this is due to the focus on the tech first. So we're not here today to discuss the tech in detail, as we don't think the technology should be on the front line here. It's only an enabler for a lot of the benefits that comes from SSI. So we're going to expand on those benefits through our live discussion in a little bit, but before we get there, we want to help you understand the basics of SSI, as described in this quote, by putting into a real-world scenario. So let's meet Jimmy. So Jimmy is about to start graduate school at the University of Toronto. He just moved to Toronto and found a good deal for an apartment rental. So he contacted a real estate broker, and he had a good initial conversation with her. So the broker will now need Jimmy to provide certain information so that they could assess his eligibility before renting the unit to him. So Jimmy is being asked to provide his legal name, his age, as what would be found in a piece of valid government ID, asking for a proof of him being a student, as in a student card, and a proof that he has sufficient funds in his bank account just to show he has enough money to cover at least half a year's rent. So Jimmy does have a valid driver's license from back home, way out in British Columbia, which contains his legal name and his age. So he also received his student card in the mail that has the status of him being a student and the expiration date from 2 years from now from the University of Toronto. So like most people, Jimmy carries these two cards with him in a physical wallet. So that's good for those pieces of information. However, Jimmy doesn't have anything on him that could prove that he has sufficient funds. So to get the proof of funds, Jimmy needs to go to the bank where he just opened up an account. So at the bank, a representative prints out a statement for Jimmy that displays his bank balance within his checking account. Jimmy stores the statement in a paper folder and leaves the bank. So now Jimmy has everything he needs. He goes to the broker. He presents the original copies of his driver's license, student card, and banking statement. So the broker verifies his original documents and makes photocopies of each of them. Satisfied with the documents, the broker now tells Jimmy that they'll need a couple of days to process everything and they'll call him back once they're done. So Jimmy goes back home with his documents, leaves the photocopies with the broker. And a couple days later, Jimmy gets a phone call from the broker who says, you know what, everything checked out and they'd love to rent the apartment to him. So Jimmy now goes back to the broker's office to sign a rental agreement. He gets a copy of the fully executed agreement while the broker keeps their copy as well, which is kept alongside Jimmy's other documents in their folder. Jimmy doesn't really know how long the broker will keep the documents and if they're going to keep them safely. But anyways, Jimmy puts his copy of the agreement in the same folder on his side with his bank statement, which he'll throw in a drawer in his desk later. And so really, this is how things are done today. So let's see now how Jimmy's journey would look like if we threw SSI into this mix. So many things would stay similar with SSI, but a lot better. So Jimmy would still have a wallet, but instead of a physical one, he would have a digital SSI wallet installed on his smartphone. And instead of having physical copies, Jimmy's driver's license and student card would be in his SSI wallet in a digital format. Instead of getting a printed copy of his bank statement, Jimmy could ask the bank to send him a digital copy directly to his wallet so that he doesn't have to go to the bank himself in person, and he doesn't have to store the printout afterwards either. So now Jimmy has all the information needed to go back to the broker, but in a digital format. So now knowing Jimmy has everything needed, the real estate broker would send Jimmy a proof request. So upon receiving this request, a notification would pop up in Jimmy's smartphone, and you could see the detailed information of this proof request shown here on this slide. So the real estate broker is not expecting to receive complete paper credentials or documents that contain pieces of information, but only the information itself at a minimum level. So knowing he has all the information and being comfortable sharing it with the real estate broker, Jimmy accepts the request, and then the broker would immediately receive the information on their end. So after receiving Jimmy's information that proves his eligibility, the broker happily decides to rent the apartment to Jimmy. The broker executes the rental agreement signature on their end and sends the agreement directly into Jimmy's wallet. So Jimmy reviews the agreement inside his wallet and accepts by signing it with his digital signature. Then the fully executed agreement is stored inside of his wallet. The broker would also have the same agreement on their system, alongside this very limited information they have about Jimmy. And that's it. It's that simple. So the process should be that simple, but there's obviously much more behind it to make it viable. So if you're having these questions on the slide in your mind, you're definitely in the right mind frame. So could this not be done by email? Why do we need an SSI wallet? How on earth does a real estate broker know if the information Jimmy provides through his SSI wallet is valid and trustworthy? So obviously the answer to this first question is no. And let me tell you the why and how about all the other ones. So self-sovereign identity enables a new model called the verifiable credential model, which makes this very simple process we just saw possible. So the three roles in this model are, number one, the issuer, which is the bank in this Jimmy example. It could also be the government or academic institutions who issued IDs such as the driver's license and student card. The second role is the holder, which is Jimmy. And the third is the verifier, which is the real estate broker in this example. So these three groups are all using systems that are enabled by an SSI infrastructure, such as the SSI wallet that Jimmy has. So using SSI, an issuer can sign and issue credentials to a holder, The holder would then keep these credentials in their wallet and presents a proof when verifiers are requesting information. So proofs and verifiable credentials are quite different, as you saw in Jimmy's case. So proofs contain pieces of information that could come from different verifiable credentials, such as the driver's license and the student card and the bank statement. Also, the information in a proof doesn't necessarily need to actually contain the values from a verifiable credential. So the information exchange could be done in a more private way. So we call this a zero knowledge proof, by which a holder only needs to present the minimum amount of information a verifier needs. So in Jimmy's case, it's not his full driver's license or even his age. It's just that he's over 18. So the SSI infrastructure is powered by a blockchain or a DLT. So certain information of the issuer, the bank, is written to the blockchain so that when a verifier receives proofs from a holder, they'll be able to query the blockchain and find out 4 things. Number 1, who issued which piece of information? Number 2, if the information was actually issued to the holder themselves. 3, if the information was altered or changed by the holder. And lastly, 4, if the information is still valid upon receipt. So self-sovereign identity enables a thing called trust over IP, since the trust is really built right into the system here. And for that reason, there doesn't need to be any integration between the issuer and the verifier, as long as their systems are compatible with an SSI infrastructure. So now that we have here and we know the logic behind the verifiable credential model, let's go back to Jimmy's story and see how SSI can make his life easier in the digital world. So once Jimmy's school semester starts, he decides to save some time by shopping for his groceries online. So he opens up a website of a popular grocery platform called Instacart. So to use this service, Jimmy needs to set up an account with Instacart. Now, since Jimmy hates having so many different accounts that require him to remember or note down passwords, and Jimmy doesn't want to use the same password across different sites for security reasons, the easiest option for him is to use Facebook, which he's usually logged into anyways. So Jimmy signs into Instacart through his Facebook login. And really now Facebook knows Jimmy is using Instacart. So Jimmy isn't really aware of the data Facebook is collecting from him or how they're using it. However, Instacart, it's easy, and Instacart is one of the only sites isn't one of the only sites that Jimmy uses Facebook to log into, as there are many more, which means Facebook actually knows quite a lot about Jimmy. So this is what we call the federated identity model, and it has become very common nowadays as it makes managing credentials simpler for people. But really, does Jimmy want to have this intermediary and third wheel in every conversation he's having? Probably not. So let's see how it could be done differently and better when Jimmy starts using his SSI wallet. So now, since most websites only really require an email address to set up an account, Jimmy could use his SSI wallet that contains a verified email address credential to log into many websites without setting up any passwords. So he can now communicate directly with the sites without needing to talk to Facebook. So here's how it would work. So when Jimmy uses Instacart for the first time, he clicks the Continue with SSI Wallet option that you can see in red here. He'll then have a QR code that's generated to scan using his SSI wallet. So Jimmy takes out his phone, accesses the wallet through Touch ID. He then uses the camera function in the wallet to scan the QR code on his laptop. So once the scan is done, a message pops up asking Jimmy if he's trying to log into instacart.ca for the first time using his wallet, and Jimmy clicks, yes, I am. Then another message would pop up asking if Jimmy approves Instacart's request to access his email address. So Jimmy clicks, yes, I approve. And voila, he's successfully logged into his Instacart account. So since Instacart could recognize his wallet now, because they've built a connection, the next time Jimmy logs in, he'll be able to do it even quicker. So this is a very simple use case of self-sovereign identity, the passwordless authentication, but we hope it gives you a better idea of how powerful SSI is. So back to Drummond's definition that we started with, we hope some of the main ideas of SSI are better understood now after this story, such as the portability and decentralization. So think of Jimmy's case again. So by having all kinds of verifiable credentials inside his digital wallet, as more vendors adopt SSI, Jimmy will be able to leverage this information from one vendor with another at his own discretion. So even if some of these vendors may stop their operations at some future point of time, Jimmy's verifiable credentials will still sit tight in his wallet and could continue to be trusted and used. So Jimmy's story was very simplified, a very simplified explanation of SSI. And we do want to thank John Phillips and his team at 460 Degrees as they inspired us to explain SSI this way through a simple story. Hopefully we could hear your feedback on this story and how we could tell it better. There's definitely a lot more, a lot more complexity behind the business, legal, technology aspects of SSI. But there's tremendous benefits to anyone. So if anyone has questions about this stuff after, we're obviously happy to take your questions offline. But what we'll do now is we'll dig a bit deeper into the business values of SSI with our speakers. And so without further ado, we're going to get into our panel discussion on how SSI could help engage their customers through frictionless things like customer onboarding, authentication, and authorization. So we're pleased to welcome our moderator, Ryan Middleton, who's a partner at Denton's here in Toronto. And Ryan will introduce the rest of the speakers and kick off the panel discussion. So thank you. I'll throw it off to you, Ryan.
Thanks so much, Matthew. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. My internet connection has been a little bit spotty this morning. First of all, thanks everyone for joining the presentation. My name is Ryan, and once again, I'm a partner at Denton's. And the reason I get excited about this stuff is that I'm dealing with a lot of large clients around the world that are dealing with a ton of processes and systems that contain a ton of friction. And we're always looking to find new technologies, whether it's blockchain, smart contracts, AI, SSI, to make those systems more smooth and create more profit for the organizations. And so I've been able to work with Northern Block and Matthew's team to be able to take some of these technologies and try to really simplify them for some of these large clients who in some cases are really becoming overwhelmed with these technologies and try to figure out what they should adopt, when they should adopt them. And Matthew and his team has really taken the next step of trying to take these technologies, turn them into prototypes to actually create actual tangible business solutions. So really happy working with you, Matthew, and the Northern Block team. Now, turning to the other folks who are going to be working with us in paneling today is Daryl O'Donnell, who's the Chief Trust Officer over at CU Ledger, and John Jordan, who's the Executive Director for the BC Emerging Digital Initiatives Department in BC. And I had a chance to talk to these guys yesterday, and these guys are super passionate about the digital identity space. I've learned quickly not to refer to it as much as the SSI space for reasons we'll get into a little bit later on. But I thought it would be helpful just to sort of turn it over both, maybe first starting with Daryl, just so you can give us a quick overview of how you got involved in the SSI space and how you sort of fit in to the overall landscape.
I got involved in the self-sovereign identity. That'll probably be the last time I say that phrase, but I'm not a huge fan of it. In the SSI space, because I was already as an investor in my own, in companies that I had founded, investor in companies that I was working with, as well as clients that I was working with, had spent so much money on digital identity just to get systems to start working. I didn't want to build identity. I didn't want to be a digital identity shop. I was building critical mission systems for search and rescue, both in combat and civilian search and rescue. And identity was brutal. When SSI came about, specifically back when, before even Sovereign Foundation was founded, I realized that the problem had been that we tried to do that centralize everything. We tried to federate into whatever organization, no matter how big you were, you could not federate with everybody. So you ended up creating nasty problems. It took me about 3 months to wrap my head around the consequences of using a blockchain to anchor just a tiny amount of data. And I realized that the whole digital identity world was changing. And that was about 3 years ago. And I figure I got another 5 or 10 years in this.
And John, I guess from your perspective, how did you get into the digital identity SSI journey?
Same sort of thing. I had a practical problem to solve at the time. It was about 2007, and I was leading the delivery of the Government of Canada's tendering service, which is now buyandsell.gc.ca. We had two, simple practical problems that we were thinking about trying to solve. One is, how could we allow a supplier to the Government of Canada to execute a contract online? Still can't be done, by the way. I think it's 2020. Second was we discovered that that there were data inconsistencies, and the problem was with legal entity names. If a legal, I mean, as many of your, as you know, and many of your clients know, if you don't have the exact character for character match of the legal entity name in the registrar where that business is, you know, that legal entity is registered, it's actually not a person. And we had contracts with non-legal entity names on them. And as I discovered the source of that problem, the problem was we didn't have access to authentic, authoritative data for legal names. It was just typey of the sales guy trying to close the deal. You know, well-meaning and everything, but you know, they didn't do it on purpose. But those two problems are basically still are what we're trying to solve today. And it's a government problem. We're not doing our job. We have to get authentic, immutable, safe data into the hands of our citizens and businesses so they can go out and do the things that they do today in person. That's really the problem. Just let's do what we do today in person, but do it at a distance over a digital network.
So, so thank you so much, John and Do, for that those introductions. I mean, when I was looking at the overview that Mathieu and his team put together, I mean, it just seems like it's a no-brainer. I mean, this saves so much time and cost, makes things so much more efficient for all the different stakeholders involved in some of these problems. I mean, I guess Daryl and John, when we were talking about preparing for this presentation, you were saying, don't focus on selling SSI, you know, focus on sort of selling a solution. Can you sort of give the audience a little bit more background of what you mean there? Maybe give some examples of how you've used that approach for some success?
I was on mute. Do you want to go first, Daryl? Or?
I was actually saying, do you want to go? Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, we're around to help people and help businesses. And so my experience has been that if I work closely with business leaders, so in this case, in the BC government, I worked with, and I'm working with the registrar, so the BC Registry Services, and we've worked together since day one. And our problem was to try to help businesses, you know, work with the government. It's a long-standing issue, you know, again, because of the experience, this jointed experience of being partly in a paper fax world and partly in this kind of pseudo-digital world. You know, it's not a very good experience. And so the discovery is driven through trying to help keep the business person and the citizen in mind. And similarly in the federal government, when I worked there, I worked actually in the business side. I worked for the Office of Small and Medium Enterprises, and our goal is to help small businesses do business with the federal government. And, you know, before that, working in telecom, working with customers, and before that, working in a small business that, you know, small businesses have to be customer focused, or else it turns out you're not in business anymore. So that's my heritage. It's just like, what's the business problem we're trying to solve, and then go and find appropriate technical solutions. Sometimes it's, you know, it's not technology, it's the business process. Fix that first. So that's kind of how, you know, we approach this. And I think what I like best about this particular technology model is that it's well aligned with what we already do today in person. Literally today in person, your customers, you know, we were talking yesterday, you know, we sign documents. This is something that stemmed from, let's see, stemmed from the Statute of Frauds in 1677 in England, which said contracts must be written and signed. We're still doing that today, which is fine, except we live in this world with a global digital network, and we do business, you know, not in person anymore. And yet we have no underpinning infrastructure to support the risks that it represents, that I can't know what's going on the other side of the equation with any level of assurance. And that's our fundamental issue. And what blocks us from that is we have no technical means to have a relationship over an internet, over a digital network, without an intermediary called the account service. And we don't know how to trust that. That's fundamental. Like, imagine you had some random character in between you and every one of your customers. How do you manage that? Like, you just, you know, it's unimaginable in the in-person world. So why do we do it in the digital world? Well, It's a byproduct of mainframes. You can
Yeah,
blame
and I would-
IBM.
And I would take a look at the again, it comes back to the business problem. What's the problem we're trying to solve?
Mhm.
One of my main clients, Ssi Ledger, they work with credit unions. Credit unions are, for those who don't know, they're just like banks. They're just owned by you. I think we have one strange bank in Canada, which is owned by its citizens. That might be on the call, ATB. But it's an interesting group that they're there to serve their members. But when you walk into a branch, you have this in-person experience, as John's talking about, when you're pretty certain that the person behind the counter works for the credit union. Therefore, you as a member can trust them. They need to check you out, and you got to pull out your ID. And it's quite easy to fake these in various different jurisdictions. So they have a fraud problem, but largely speaking, you identify yourself. In Canada, we tend to use our chip and PIN cards to do that. So that's when I'm there in person. When I go to log in, though, I'm using a username and a password. Hopefully my password isn't 12345. It's at least as complex as 1234556. We know that those passwords are already compromised. We know that people are getting ripped off all the time. People are incurring the liability. The weird thing is we're acting totally differently when we're going into the digital, the mobile, and the web world. And things get even stranger when I call in. So when I walk in, it's fairly normal. When I log in, it's kind of weird. Username and password, highly insecure. We write them down on Post-it notes and people will know them. But when I call in, it gets really strange because they actually treat me like a criminal. They will ask me, what's your mother's maiden name? What's your favorite color? I got locked out of my credit card recently. It asked me, what's your dream car? I drive a Jeep. I'm not a car guy. I had happened to have rented a car on a trip at one point and used that as my answer, and I totally forgotten it. I got locked out because of that. So they go through this stuff, and one of the CEOs of a credit union I was talking to said, basically, we treat our members like criminals in order to try and protect the credit union and the member from fraud through the call center. So as credit unions try to implement more and more procedures to protect themselves, they tie themselves into a bigger knot. When they go to a vendor that says, I want to have this app that you can put on, like Cisco Duo or something, it costs them $3 to $4 a month per person, which means they can't do it. I can't even use that when I walk into the credit union anyways. So what we've done is create a little very basic app that they run. And then the Ssi Ledger is owned by credit unions. That's what another unique thing. They receive a notice that happens when they says basically, hey, Daryl, are you signing in at the credit union? I don't need to announce myself, just use my device for that. When I call the call center, it'll say, hey, Daryl, are you talking to the call center? Because the credit union wants to know that I still control my device and the credential, like Jimmy had, on my phone. So that's cool. The credit union knows this, but what was really strange, and we should have thought of this in the past, but the feedback we got from members was, it's really awesome to know it's actually the credit union on the other end. So we actually have this two-way channel that we weren't even thinking about. But it's a very simple problem. Make it easy for me to do business with you. No one woke up and said, I need a better digital identity today.
No, I mean, those are great examples, and makes me think though. So is obviously a better way to do this. And when you're going to your various customers, or you're going to the various organizations in the BC government, and you're saying there's a better way, we want to go ahead and take these various steps. One of the things that we were talking about yesterday in preparation, John, is you're mentioning the importance of reducing friction in the existing ecosystems. You don't have to force new ones, and that sort of resonated with me, because even some of the clients that I deal with in the tech space, they have these great ideas, and then they want to create this massive ecosystem to sort of roll out their particular vision through that thought as to why we maybe want to start with our existing ecosystem, see what we can do to go ahead and make those work before we jump into building something completely brand new.
Yeah, I mean, my good colleague of mine, Peter Watkins, who's just a really great guy and a giant brain here in BC, probably the reason I moved here. He said, you know what, John, like whatever you're doing, you can't cause a terraforming of the IT infrastructure of government. We've got hundreds and hundreds of applications on platforms ranging from, mainframes to cloud native. And if whatever it is we were coming up with required everybody to rewire their entire set of systems, that's a non-starter. So in terms of adoption, we're taking we're doing our best to have an additive situation where we add things to existing services that enable them to develop these digital relationships with their constituents in an incremental fashion. You can kind of think of it as like a print driver. Add this new print driver to your system, and you now can issue and verify these new credentials. So that's kind of an approach we're taking in terms of adoption. The other thing that's really a challenge is helping people unlearn the last horrible 40 years of computing. We've learned how to deal with the, there's a lot of great things about technology, of course, that we've benefited from, but as we've moved beyond the enterprise border, we're now experiencing these kinds of issues that we raise, as we move into the global situation, and we're having to commute trust across enterprise borders, across jurisdictional borders. And that's really what this challenge is about. So there's a learning curve here. And usually what I say is just forget about what you know about computing. Let's go back to the way we work as humans. We develop relationships. We build up trust in those relationships. And sometimes when we enter into a formal relationship, we require our counterparty to provide evidence of whether it is who they are, or that they're a legal entity, or they're an authorized signing authority for their legal entity, or whatever, right? This is a very normal pattern. And this technology aligns with that way of doing things. So I think this is a big benefit. And if we, learn how to provide a good user experience around that, then I think we're, in good shape. It's early days, but I feel confident that that we can get there, that we have to get there, And this situation today that we're all living in is just further evidence that we need a way to have trustworthy business over the internet. Like there's only two models on the internet that are succeeding right now: buying shoes and having your data exploited for advertising. And the reason you can buy shoes is because you have a credit card. So fundamentally, the trust is anchored in the transaction networks of payment processors. They don't really care who you are. They just care that you can pay. And of course, data exploitation, well, I mean, that goes without explaining.
Yeah. I think, Ryan, you were asked about ecosystem. There's a question in the system here from Stephen Cox. It says, does the SSI model require some form of national identity provider to catalyze countrywide service? And this is where the thing that John and I are both working towards is, it would be great if there were, in North America, if there were provincial and state issuers of driver's licenses and, national, passports that were doing this, but we don't need that today. It's going to get better when we do. As a business example, one of the another learning that came out of the credit union world is, by definition of having a credit union account, if you are a credit union member, you have been KYC'd. Someone has gone through a legal process. They've signed up and said, I've done a know your customer. They have different acronyms behind that, but KYC means I am a person and I'm good enough to get a bank account. That signal alone, just the value of that, it's not saying this is Daryl O'Donnell and here's my verified address and my driver's license capabilities and my height, all that type of stuff. Just simply that I'm Daryl O'Donnell, I'm a member of Credit Union X, in my case, Meridian. That signal alone is worthwhile to insurers. For example, health insurance companies, one of their number one modes of fraud is synthetic identity. So if they have somebody who's been a member of a credit union, say for 15 years, and they can get that information, they know that they have a far lower incidence of health fraud, and they're actually willing to pay the credit union a small amount of money, measured not in dollars, but tens of dollars. So it's not huge, but it adds up quickly, because they receive immediate value. You start doing that, you start to build the ecosystem. And as groups like BC come on board with verifiable credentials, John has a verifiable credential version of his service card, it becomes even more powerful because I get to use that in a privacy respecting way, and people start to use that. But you don't have to start by building the whole ecosystem and wait for somebody. There are probably problems you're facing right now that you can radically improve just one simple process. that's how you get started, basically.
Yeah, just to echo that, Daryl, I think in a lot of these businesses with existing identity access management system and existing processes and stuff like that, it just, and like John said, it is an add-on. It should be an easy thing to just add on to what you're already doing, just by offering that additional value, whether it's to your customers, to your employees, or to vendors that you're dealing with. And so we were talking, obviously, in the explanation about verifiable credentials and wallets. It seems like a chicken and egg problem. You need one to have the other one work very well. I guess starting with wallets, and I would throw it back to you, Daryl. I would be interested in understanding your vision on where the whole wallet space is going and how people could adopt wallets today, or what they should be thinking about. And for those who don't know, Daryl wrote a fantastic report on digital wallets last year, which I know he had a great time writing from start to finish. But it's a great report, and I'm sure he could tell you how to download it. But what would you kind of give as advice, Daryl, to businesses that are looking to adopt self-sovereign identity, and what should they do with wallets?
Yeah. So we wrote some of the people on the call actually were part of the project where we kicked it off and dug deep and looked at the problem. Everyone was saying the digital wallet's going to solve this. It's the digital wallet, which apparently could do everything. And it turns out that digital wallets aren't well understood. But what we're seeing right now is there's really two types of wallets in this space. Ones that I would call generic are really for the geeks. They're ugly applications. It doesn't look and feel good like a wallet. I don't know how to use it. And there's these ideas that if I want to give you my address, I get to decide, well, is that for my driver's license, my library card, my uniform? I'm just share my address, please. I don't want to think. So where we're seeing a lot of adoption is what I would call an embedded mini wallet, where banking apps, for example, credit unions are taking some of their banking apps and embedding a wallet so that you don't, as a member, even know that there's a very private, unique to you and the credit union communication channel. There's a digital credential sitting inside of this wallet that allows more protection. So you don't have to go and pull out a dongle and type in a 6-digit number or anything, but it's sitting there and making your life a lot easier, because it's really used between you and just the credit union, or you and just a business. So in your Instacart example, it would be just me and them. Where it gets interesting, though, is if I want to walk into another credit union or provide that to a health insurance company, that's where we'll find you'll have more generic kind of wallets that start to look and feel like a real physical wallet. And there's a whole bunch of detail, and Mathieu was alluding to the fun I had. I had temper tantrums writing. I don't do reports. I cannot tell you how allergic I am to them. I was a miserable person, but it's out, and it's like 80-something pages. But if anybody wants it, I'll drop a link in on the chat here too.
If someone uses an embedded wallet with their clients, and they have a relationship directly with their clients, if they start issuing credentials to their customers,
Yeah.
Could these credentials be used elsewhere? Like we keep talking about the portability, but how would it work in the real world?
They certainly can, and we're starting to see that right now. This is where John and I were by no means at different ends of the spectrum, but we're both pushing forward to make sure that this interoperability, that my credit union app will work with a generic wallet and work with a health application. We're helping define, and Governor BC just stood up and is a founding member of a new foundation called the Trust Over IP Foundation, where we're starting to set those standards so that we don't have to reinvent how do I ask for a credential. A digital wallet is really great if I can put everything in it, but if you can't ask to see something in it, it doesn't help me. It's just a database. You need to have an electronic way of saying, could I please see that prepaid Visa card? And John, and maybe you want to speak a little bit to Trust Over IP Foundation, because that's really what that's all about, so that we don't all have to reinvent the wheel. We can just show the patterns. Here's how you get a driver's license. Here's how you show a corporate registration type of thing. You want to talk about Trust Over IP, John?
Sure. I'm just, I also wanted to provide an example. I'm getting itchy talking. I want to share my screen here.
Okay, let me stop sharing my screen, John, so you can do it.
Because I'm a big fan of clicky things, as Daryl knows. So I want to give a real world, sort of a coming real world example. We're working with the Law Society of British Columbia and the BC Court Service. And the challenge there is that as a result of a Supreme Court ruling a year ago, bail review hearings must be held every 30 days, no matter what. They were taking too long, and it was violating the folks who were being held without bail's constitutional rights. This is going to create extra demand on the court systems, and it requires the lawyer who's representing the defendant to have access to the audio recordings that the government holds in their systems to do the research they need. And so they need to get access to that online, which they currently don't have. And the government only wants to provide lawyers with that information. So how do I prove I'm a lawyer online? Well, even if I have strong digital identity and I know your name, that doesn't mean you're a lawyer. Well, who's the authority on who's a lawyer? Well, it's the Law Society. And they have a thing called a practicing certificate. It's in law. It's what they issue to a lawyer in good standing. So what if we could give the Law Society the ability to issue these things digitally? And that's what we're working with them for. So they'll add this print driver to their member portal. A member can log in and request a credential and hold it in a wallet. For me, I'm right now going to show like that I have a verified person credential, but this could be my Law Society credential. And in order to gain access to the new site, I simply go to the new site. I say access site. I'm going to use a credential to get in. I'm going to scan that code, which is requesting my lawyershipness. I say, here it is. I present it. And I'm in. So that's the kind of experience we're looking for, right? Is like, there was no integration between the Law Society and the BC Court Service. That's certainly a technical option. But what happens when the next service wants to provide access to lawyers? The Land Registry, the BC Services Registry, the registry in Alberta giving access to a BC lawyer. Like, is every service that needs to know a lawyer gonna call up the BC Law Society and integrate with it? Not very practical. If we give the lawyers something that they can carry with them and provide evidence, and it's trusted at a technical and a governance level, we're in good shape. So that's kind of like a little preview into that. And then if I stop that share and I bring up another share, let's go with this one. And I look at we're not going to go into this detail, but just to say that what the Trust Over, here's the logo for the Trust Over IP Foundation, and its job is to facilitate global adoption of this model. We need a way for businesses to understand what's being offered, that there's a clear and certain pattern that's being followed, and a way to evaluate technical and governance solutions that are being offered to them. And that's what this stack is about. Like in technology, we like to organize things so that we have an ability to evaluate things, the components of an overall system. And so that's what this diagram is getting at. And it's a bit of a technical, not a nice graphic design version, but it provides the ability for somebody to evaluate the different aspects of an overall solution. And what's really important here, and what I'm very pleased about as we bring this to the market, is that it puts governance at an equal footing to technology. And that is where we've fallen down on the internet. We've relinquished control of things because we didn't pay attention to the fact that whoever owns the account service actually owns the relationship. And that's a governance fall down, not a technical fall down. And so without getting into all the details of the levels, each of these layers, there's an opportunity to deploy a technical solution. There's an opportunity to govern that solution. There's an opportunity to define what interoperability means. And in the end, enable, vast ecosystems of applications and services that could interoperate. That's the vision. And we have a number of organizations that are founding this, including the government of British Columbia, MasterCard, Kiva, a large social enterprise service, IBM, Evernym, which is one of the startups in this space, and eSatis, which is a German company specializing in information security and working closely with the government and banks there. And we have dozens of other organizations that we're actively engaged in discussions to launch this organization 5th of May. And it is a Linux Foundation organization as well, I should say, which is really important to us as they provide, world-class governance for open community building. That's a lot of pitch.
That's awesome. Thanks, John. If people want more information on this, how could they find out or find you?
Yeah, they can reach myself or Daryl or Drummond, or perhaps they can just contact you and we can get us in touch.
Awesome. One of the projects that we had been working on was in out of all spaces in the firearm space in the US, where there is a real lack of trust that, people have some views about owning firearms and firearm regulations and stuff like that. Whereas on the other side, you have folks that are law-abiding citizens, law-abiding firearm owners, and they want to be able to prove that they're being actual responsible firearm owners. So by having digital proofs of firearm licenses, of training programs, of the right processes being followed when they're doing transfers at gun shows and so forth. So that was a very specific use case we worked on. And I think, Daryl, it goes to, I think in the short term, we have a similar view that there's going to be a lot of these very specific use cases where it just benefits like a specific ecosystem like this, like firearm owners or like the credit unions. If we're talking about consumers in general, and I think one of the questions came on the chat here earlier, where do you need to have a government issued ID? We touched on that, but I think I just want to add, there's a lot of services that are available today that do provide these attestations of valid IDs, whether it's a driver's license or a passport. So you have on Fido or Trulio, there's a lot of these companies that exist today, and a lot of these companies are growing significantly right now just because of the need to do these verifications over the internet, right? And I think, Ryan, you mentioned also having some complexities dealing with folks over the internet where you have to execute contracts, and how do you know it's the actual person that's providing these signatures? With everything that's happening right now, do you think that it's really going to expedite the need to have verifiable credentials? And are you guys seeing movements in the health space and stuff like that?
I mean, certainly right now we've got one CEO of a credit union screaming that he didn't prioritize things because his staff don't want to touch anything that members have touched. Members don't want to touch anything that staff have touched, and guess how they're walking into the branch and identifying themselves? They're handing devices back and forth. So yeah, we're seeing huge cases. The amount of fraudsters are also well aware right now that the gates have been kind of opened a little bit, and they're diving in. So now they're looking to the Onfidos of the world. The MyTax is more of an older school in the banking industry, to try to help solve that, to try to help just solve the fraud. That's what their number one concern is right now, is the fraud of giving you something digital. But once they get digital, now they're happy to have that digital piece, but they have to be very careful, because once they let you in, they don't want to necessarily give you the keys of the kingdom.
So there's, I think, two parts to that question. One is that on the question of source of an identity attestation. I mean, I'm from the government, so the government is the only legitimate issuer of identity attributes. It's just that simple. Nevertheless, we haven't stood up to that task just yet in full. And so there are these interim solutions. So again, that's not wrong. It's just the verifier of that identity attestation needs to make a trust decision. They have to decide how much risk are they willing to take on. If you can prove that the identity attributes come from a government issuer and that it's backed by law and it's backed by the trustworthy processes of government identity verification, then your risks are lowered as a verifier of those attributes. Anything else introduces more risk. That's fine. Like, I mean, it's maybe less than just, obviously it's less than just, random attributes. But what we'd like to get to is, the authoritative sources of person registration, legal registration, land registration, so that those foundational attributes can be put into play by people and businesses, around the world. Part two is, on the problem that Daryl was talking about, like is, physical passing of credentials, and the chance of infection and so forth and so on. I mean, we've in fact we'll be demonstrating today the beginnings of a solution that could help, for example, getting essential workers back on the move so that we can reboot our economy. Really what they need to be able to do is to gather up a collection of credentials from various authoritative issuers and be able to present that to gain safe entry. So I can show quickly a share screen again and situate that for you to show exactly the kind of thing that this technology can approach, this technology and governance approach can enable. So here we have a trust triangle where we have on the purple icon, the issuers. So issuers there is a new service we're proposing called the Essential Services Gateway. The health gateway where you can get your personal health information in BC, emergency management, life labs. These are issuers issuing data to essential workers who then present it to these kinds of places, anywhere where you need safe entry or to interact, whether it's a bank teller, the Sûreté de Québec at the bridge in Ottawa to get to Gatineau, a work camp for the LNG facilities in BC. You can, everywhere where there is one of these. This is our current solution, right? A visitor logbook. Well, how does that help us with contract tracing? That's a tough one. So we have designed very quickly, since Friday, my team put together 6 issuers that represent the ability for an essential service business owner to register their business as an essential service and invite their workers to come in and get a credential that indicates the service they're issuing or they're performing. They can go to their health gateway, they can go to the medical lab and get their credential. And then on the other side, a service that allows an entry point controller, any one of those places I mentioned, long-term healthcare facility, to generate a verification point using a QR code they can tape on the wall and a private web page that their security guard will get the results of that. And it's, again, it's a simple kind of a situation where we can quickly instrument our processes with digitally secure approaches and provide a service to help our economy get back up and running. It's something that I can demonstrate, and if people are interested, we could come back and perhaps do another seminar or something. We could see how that goes with our health management. We think it's a very powerful model for quickly bringing trust to situations that need it.
Do you guys think there's value, there's monetization that's possible from the issuer standpoint? If I'm going to take the effort and become a trusted party and start issuing credentials?
Totally.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. And then John, I think one of the things that we've talked about is if I had an equivalent to a BC service card or in Ontario, my Ontario driver's license credential, the government may or may not want to take money on, that's their choice. But when I issue a credential, for example, one of the cases we were talking about yesterday when we met Ryan, imagine if there was an insurance company standing behind Daryl O'Donnell, acting as a business person, as a director in a company, interacting with Ryan at Denton's, signing off on contracts, except I'm doing it digitally. If I'm using a credential, that insurance company may have said, hey, listen, I only accept a national or provincial driver's license or passport to get up to, as a starting point. I'm going to send private detectives out to find out about you. I'm going to talk to your bank and you're going to let me because you're as a director. We're going to have a huge bar. If I walked up with that credential, how much, Ryan, would Denton's pay on a multi-billion-dollar deal? A lot. Because you're going to incur those costs again. So yeah, these credentials, and what's really cool is that can be paid for totally privacy respecting. You don't necessarily know it's Daryl O'Donnell. You just know that I'm an officer authorized to sign for that, and it was me.
I mean, I sort of see our job as government is to, drive risk out of citizens' lives and business lives. And we do that by providing, the foundational aspects of the economy, right? Like it's it's government law that creates contracts' ability to be executed. And that's driven out of the legal entity registries, you know. I don't think that charging a citizen for being able to for them to be able to have access to their identity attributes attested to by government, like I don't see a charge for that, or them being charged to use those attributes. You don't get charged to use your driver's license or your BC services card today, but I certainly do see how that underpins the economy, you know. So let's fire up the economy. Like, let's get at it. Come and help us. Bring your developers, bring your governance folks. Let's do it. Stop waiting. We're ready.
Going back to Daryl's comments, you know, as a lawyer, I'm trying to do these large multi-billion-dollar transactions over the computer. I talk to my accounting friends. They're trying to do some very complicated stuff over the computer. And the reality is, historically, and it's only been in the last 6 or 7 years, everything was done face-to-face. There would be closings within boardrooms with hundreds and hundreds of documents within people to sign, you know, live. And so, you know, to your point, right now, we don't have a lot of technology solutions that allow us to do that while still mitigating the risk. Question, I guess, Daryl, when you're talking about the ability for some of the issuers to monetize some of the data and some of the KYC steps they've already taken, do you think that's going to create the proper incentive to make sure that when their technology solutions to deal with the specific issue they have within their organization, they're going to say to themselves, well, not only do we want to solve the problem we have for our particular organization, but recognizing that we may be able to monetize this information with other processes and solutions with other third parties. And as a result, it makes sense for us to do it in an interoperable manner where it's not just solving one problem, it can be used in multiple other areas that we can make some money off of it.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you right now that that's being done. I can show you services are used in the finance industry that if I give me your personal email, and I will tell you a social score on how trustable that email is. Because if it's been sitting at Gmail since 2009, I know there's something there. If it's 7 days old, you are now suspicious. So we're already doing that. What's wrong about the situation right now is you probably had no idea that was happening and you got nothing out of it. Whereas if I can sit there and say, hey, listen, I carry a piece of identity that is, one, insured for liability and stuff, but behind it, there are services that you will know you can trust. There's a government who's issued real identity. Here's which email validator service would you like to pay for? You can do all of that through a single type of transaction. And you don't have to worry about the complexity behind that scene. You just get the data you want, and you don't have to hold on to the data afterwards or worry about the fact your personal data is sitting with 150 million other people ready to be stolen somewhere.
Okay, thank you to John, Daryl, Ryan for being on this call today. I think this was an amazing conversation. I think we could probably go on for hours on these types of conversations. I think we all agree that there are so many possibilities that are now available and problems that can be solved using these types of technologies. I would say the only thing that's missing is people. Like, people need to start pushing and start joining us and join this movement. So if anyone is looking to get into the space or has ideas or whatever, I'm sure anyone on this call here would be very happy to talk about it. So please join the movement. Just to announce, our next webinar is going to be in early May. It's going to be on the COVID Credential Initiative. So we're a part of this initiative. Northern Block joined this at the end of March. So there's over 60 companies that are doing one thing or another in the SSI space that want to use digital identity as a way to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 and reboot public trust. So SSI Toronto will be hosting this webinar as part of the initiative, and Lucy Yang, who is the Director of Operations at Northern Block, is actually leading one of the initiatives there, the Coordination and Communication Initiative. So she'll be bringing some people together to talk about the subject, about what it's about and what we're trying to do. We also hope that could spur more discussion about how Canada could contribute globally to this. So that's it. Thank you everyone for joining. To receive any updates on these future events, make sure to join our meetup group, or you could just follow Northern Block's Twitter account. We post a lot about this stuff. If anyone wants to partner or inquire about speaking, please reach out to Lucy, which is lucy@northernblock.ca. Thank you one more time. Thank you very much to Ryan, John, and Daryl. Really appreciate your time being on here, and I'm sure that the participants that joined today got some good value out of this. So thank you.